Well, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further in hopes that it becomes helpful for you and your life and your faith. My name is Jeremy. I'm the host here as your content director. And as always, be sure to hit that subscribe button, whether you are watching on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. We are picking up after part one of a series called Love Thy Neighbor, and we are with our lead pastor, Buck. And Buck is sitting here with me. Buck, how are you feeling today?
I am feeling fantastic.
Fantastic.
My son's actually calling me right now.
Is he really?
He is.
Oh, man.
Yeah,
Is this,
I'll let it roll.
Just which one?
Big John.
Big John.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
Jonathan.
but Timbo just texted me like 2 seconds ago.
Well,
right?
then we were in a meeting and Sam was calling you as well.
Yeah, so they're all over.
Yeah.
And so yeah,
Yeah.
So,
I didn't tell you this. I think it was Timbo's birthday this past weekend, right?
Yes.
I saw him driving.
Yeah. Well, he is.
I saw him out in the wild.
He's been so ready.
Turned 16.
He's so ready, and he is our most wild son. Like,
Yeah.
Outdoorsy. He learned how to weld like by himself, and then like did welding projects, bought like better and better and better welders.
Yeah.
And he's just that guy.
Yeah. Well, every time I am over there, he's like, "Hey, I'm going to fish," or "Hey, I'm building this thing in the garage."
He just texted me. He's like, "Hey, Dad, can I go to the land? And go hang out, with his buddy Mason." So the land's up in Land Passage. Jill's dad has some land up there. So yeah, he's constantly that. But he's amazing.
Fun times.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed something as we're sitting here, and you mentioned it last week. It's been a while since you've had a haircut.
Yeah. So Thursday night we had our Northpoint together, and that was a lot of fun, and just talking about some fun stuff. But that night, before I got out on stage, and I said this, but I went to the bathroom and was getting ready. And I looked at myself, and I legitimately had the thought. I was like, "You look like a crazy man."
Yeah,
because my hair was like, and there was like some sprouts coming here. Like it wasn't like this way. It was like so long that like the tips were falling.
Yeah,
and it was just getting a little wild, and I got to really kind of push it back because it was so. And then so I had that. Yeah, it was crazy long. And then Friday night, Jill and I were going on a date, and I was like, "Babe, check this out." And I just pulled my hair all kinds of different ways, and she's like, "Oh no!" I was like, "I said I need to get it cut."
I don't know if I've ever shared this, but I remember being in awe of your hair when we went to Kenya for Mosaic.
Yeah,
and your bags went to Russia or something crazy.
Yeah,
and you didn't get your bag for like 3 or 4 days.
It was terrible.
Yeah, and you kept washing the same pair of clothes every night, right?
Yeah,
but you didn't have your hair product. And I remember you walked out like day 2 or 3 after you'd washed your hair at some point, and it was still standing. Now, it wasn't like slick and nice and cool, but it was still standing up, and it had these curls like on the top of it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like permanently there.
Yes. Yeah, when I lost my luggage, I felt insecure. Not necessarily because of anything other than my hair products.
You knew your hair was good? Oh no, everybody's gonna see the hair like without the product.
I was like, there's no way to make it do what it does, and but it is naturally like Timbo's hair. If you see his, it's kind of like that. Yeah. So it's just if I just
kind of stands up.
A buddy of mine, that the first time I took a vacation, Jill, myself, and him and his wife. We were all, hanging out, having a good time. And I just got out of the shower and, just kind of dried off, got freshened up. And I came out of the bathroom, and they're all sitting there. And my buddy looked at me and he was like, "Oh, my gosh." And he just started, like, freaking out. He's like, "Your hair, it looks the same." It's like, I know. Yeah. He had no idea. So that was his first impression. But Saturday night, I got home. It's a long day. Timbo got a truck, and it'd been a long time coming. I've shared the whole car story, how we keep getting cars from Jill's dad. Yeah. I'm super grateful.
All the car stories.
Oh, and they're such nice cars. I'm like, your grandfather is the nicest guy in the entire world, because you guys are driving like luxury cars. Yeah. And I had a Honda CRX growing up, and it was like, I think it was $1,000 total. Yeah. And the thing barely ran. And, I was grateful to have a car, but they have such nice cars. So Luke and I had just gotten home from Dallas, and it was a huge adventure because we went up there for one car, didn't find that, but then found another one. And I got home, and it's like Sunday's coming, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I was like, my hair feels even longer now. So Saturday night, I got a stool, and I got our vacuum, and I got my cutters, and I sat in my bathroom and went and And I did it. I'm good to go for Sunday. Here it is. It's my haircut.
I don't know if I want to ask or not what role the vacuum plays in all of that.
Well, hair's everywhere. So
okay. I thought like you're like sucking it up to hold it or something.
No, but when I cut my boys' hair, because it's too expensive to cut all. I mean, 5 boys times 25. That's $125 every 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah,
like that's not going to happen. So I've just cut hair for a while.
Yeah.
And it started in college when I was cutting my international golfer buddies' hair.
Nice.
They were like, I need a haircut. And I was like, hey, I'll try.
I got some scissors.
Yeah, and so that's where it all started. Anyways, I cut their hair on the back porch, and I get our blower for, like, blown leaves and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And so if our neighbors look at us, I mean, they're in their skippies out there because, getting hair all over your clothes.
Yeah.
And they're on this stool, and they're like, and they see their dad,
with a leaf blower just.
Yeah, because hair's everywhere. So... yeah, they're like, that's the preacher guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, I mean, maybe they take it as a tip and they'll do it with their kids.
I'm sure that's exactly what happens. All right, let's get on track here.
Sure.
So you were in part 1 of Love Thy Neighbor this past week, and this is a shorter series where we have a break this Sunday because of July 4th, and then we're doing part 2 on July 11th.
Yeah.
But it's such an important thing because, I mean, Jesus said, love God, love people, like the 2 greatest commandments, right?
Yeah.
And you talked a little bit about that on Sunday.
Yeah.
And I think anybody who's sitting in the seats, they're going, oh, love thy neighbor. He's going to tell me to be nice to people. He's going to tell me to love the people that are hard to love and stuff like that. But you actually took it back to the foundation of where loving your neighbor even comes from. And that is what Jesus said. He said, and I quote, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And there was a lot that you unpacked in terms of what all of that means. But
sure,
I want to talk a little bit about those 3 ways that it's described, and this is taken from the Old Testament, the heart and the soul and the mind. How would you unpack how we love God from each of those 3 individual places, and what exactly does that mean necessarily?
Well, so I'll just start by just a little bit of reiterating Sunday in terms of like,
yeah, sure.
The whole foundation. If you're going to love your neighbor, which I think is going to change the world, I think if we all loved our neighbor the way Jesus called us to do it, it changed the world. The world would be fantastic. There would be something so beautiful and rich and meaningful and so full of light that would be in our world if we loved the way Jesus called us to love. So if that's the case, like then there is something we can all tangibly do to make the world a little bit better, and to kind of bring light into a lot of dark places. It feels like in our culture, in our world, and so on. So, but that's really hard. We're busy. There are neighbors we like and neighbors we don't. And so my whole point part 1 was to go, what's the source? What's the engine? What's the thing that's going to compel, inspire, move you to go do that? And oftentimes it's if we haven't first experienced it, it's really hard to give it. And, this plays itself out like with forgiveness. This plays itself out with so many aspects of life. But, once you experience something, once you receive something, you're like, oh my gosh, that's what it looks like. That's what it feels like. And then oftentimes it can move you to do that very thing that you received. And so that's Jesus' point. He's like, first and foremost, love God with every ounce of who you are. And when you move into that and take steps, and as I said at the end, you go all in, there's a richness to that. There's a joy to that. There's a happiness to that. There's a satisfaction to that. It's so meaningful. And it's the more you get into that, then it's like out of the overflow of that, you're like, okay, well, there's that neighbor who I may not agree with politically, or there's that neighbor who their dog barks all night long,
or the neighbor who cuts their kid's hair and then hits him with a leaf blower.
With blowers in the back, and you're like, that is so strange. But, but then there's something more, there's something that like trumps all of that, and that's what you experience with God, and it allows you to cross the street, allows you to, bring cookies, it allows you to help the neighbor move some stuff in the garage, it allows you to do whatever it is, it allows you to pray for them, those kind of things. So that's the source, and Jesus gave us the source. To love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I love that, that comes from, in the Hebrew, or one of the things in the Old Testament with kind of the nation of Israel, they would do every morning, they would do pretty much all the time, they would quote this thing called the Shema. And the Shema is something you would teach your kids, and it's the whole idea to hear. The word, this idea means hear these words, and it's the words, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your might, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so they would repeat this, and Jesus pulls from that and says, basically to the crowd, don't you guys remember? That's the whole point, and that empowers you. And so loving God with all your mind is this concept to go, we have questions, there's reason, there's, linear thought, there's logic. It's like, I got to wrap my mind around some of the, things of God. Like I begin to think through, I begin to logically deduce. I get to a place to go, okay, here's my questions. I'm getting there. My mind is wrapped around who God is. I'm gaining an understanding. There's insights. There's the aha moments. There's the logical moments to go, yeah, it stands to reason. That's it. And then, a lot of times when we're there, we also love God with all of our heart. And our heart, I would say, would be our passions, our emotions, our man, my heart breaks for them. I love them. Man, they have such incredible value. Now they're really rude, but they're so valuable. Mm-hmm. We do that with our kids. I love them to death, but man, my heart is just, it's hard. And then your soul is your source. Your soul is the core of who you are. Your soul is your very being. That's the deepest part of who you are. And so Jesus says, he basically, in summary, says the whole thing, love God with all of you.
All parts of you.
All parts of you.
Yeah.
Every aspect of you. And so, I love he says that because we have questions. And I think sometimes it's like, hey, I've got, things I want to reason through. I want to talk about. I want to understand more. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, love him with all your mind. And there's, we have emotions. God, I'm hurt. I'm lonely. I'm fearful. And God can meet those. And then, your source of life, your meaning, your purpose, your significance, your value, who you are. So,
yeah,
Jesus said, love God with all of who you are.
Yeah, that's great. I think for me personally, I remember I've heard this verse a lot. And then it wasn't until I heard somebody talk about the mind aspect that, I think so often people have doubts in faith and they go, and this could be a little bit of a tangent. We'll get back on lane of love your neighbor, but people have doubts in faith and they go, this is a hindrance in me loving God and my relationship with God. I've got to figure this out so that I can. And it's like, I think I view it differently now. Like when I have doubts or when somebody's going through doubts or I discover something new, a different logic or reasoning that gets to God, it just makes me more in awe of who he is. And it's like when my mind can comprehend new aspects of him or his character or who he is, it actually leads me to loving him more in those moments. Like loving him with your mind, I think is just a new concept for people. It's good. Like it's part of a relationship with God to understand why you believe and think the way you do about him. And there's a kind of a relational aspect to that, which I think is just really cool.
Yeah, and this is why, we talk a lot about starting points, a small group that I think there's one going to kick off in July.
Yeah.
But this is why, we want people to come to Northpoint and love discover a God that they can love with all their mind. So if they have scientific questions, if they have historical questions, if they have, religious questions, if they have, we want to create the safest place in the world for you to ask all those questions.
Yeah.
None of are off limits. I would say the outcome to all those questions, and you would imagine I would as the pastor, is the outcome is I think the most plausible answer to those questions is Jesus. I think what we experience, what Jesus said is the most plausible answer to the scientific questions, to, the questions about relationships, to the questions about what's going on in this world, the questions about, what's with religion, all these kind of things. They all come back to Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's, the church answer. But it really is, we want to create a place that you can do that, because I think sometimes when I say, on Sunday, I said, what's the question that's standing in the way from you going all in? From saying, Jesus, I am all in to love you. I think that's for real, because sometimes, like we were talking before the podcast, you can put a question up there and it keeps you from God, but you kind of like that. You kind of go I kind of like being kept from God, because I can, say, well, this big question, and you keep holding it, and it's almost like you're a victim of the question. You're shackled because of the question. You're in prison because of the question. And, if you're willing to really get after the question, answer the question, it will set you free. And perhaps it'll set you free to something you're unfamiliar with. It'll set you free to a God who really does exist. It'll set you free to a God who really does love you. It'll set you free to a place that you can be forgiven for your past, present, future. It'll set you free to a place to know that your eternity is secure, that heaven and hell are real. Eternity is real. Well, that can create a lot of fear. Like, how do I function in that place? How do I even operate in that place? How do I begin to move in that place? That's so unfamiliar and so uncomfortable that I'm going to keep this question between God and I. Mm-hmm. So I can say, well, I'm not going all in because of this question.
Yeah.
We want to create a place, and I think Jesus put it forth and just said, hey, go after that question. Because I promise you, there's good answers to those questions, and you're going to find a God who you can love with all of your intellect, all of your reason, all of your science, all of your history. You'll find answers in God.
Yeah.
And that can move to a heart that's overflowing to go, wow, a God is that big, that loves me that much. My heart is overflowing. And that begins to impact the core of who you are.
Yeah. I think that's really good. I think it makes me think of C.S. Lewis, who found God through reason and intellect. That was his story. And then he came to to be one of the, 20th century giants of the faith, you could say. Well, you mentioned one thing that I wanted to go back to. What was the question again that you left with? Can you say it one more time? The question at the end of your message on Sunday?
Yeah, it was just what's keeping you from going all in for Jesus. It's like, what's keeping me from, moving towards Jesus Christ, going, Jesus, I'm surrendering to you.
Yeah.
Like, what's the thing?
What do you think is the thing for most people that is keeping them from going all in? And I'm not saying all in terms of accepting Jesus as their Savior, but just all in with everything they have into who Jesus is.
Yeah, I always want to be careful with those questions because it's such a big stroke of the brush, to do that. But you've heard me say this before, and you've heard, great thinkers say this before, that what keeps people from Jesus isn't intellectual. What keeps people from Jesus, and I've observed this observationally, is moral. Mm-hmm. I want to do what I want to do. And if I go and I actually go all in, then that means, like, I may have to submit my life to something.
Yeah.
I may have to be under an authority besides myself.
Yeah.
I may have to say no to my desires. I may have to say no to the things that have brought me this temporary pleasure that I have to chase and chase and chase. The thing, I even mentioned this on Sunday, the thing I love about Jesus is he said to his followers or people who were considering following him, he said, if anyone comes to me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will save it. You're going to find life on the other side of that.
Yeah.
And this is where Jesus makes these huge statements to go, I have come to give you life and give you life to the full.
Yeah.
I have come, my truth will set you free.
I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life, those kind of things.
Yeah, so we hold on to, I would say majority, I want to do what I want to do. That's the truth. So I'm going to put up a lot of straw men, and I want to be careful with that because I know they're real questions. I'm going to put up a lot of straw men so I can keep doing what I want to do. But what Jesus says is my invitation to you is to go, tear those straw men down, answer the real questions that are at the core of between me and you will find life on the other side of that. You will find joy on the other side of that. You will experientially find meaning and purpose in your everyday life. You will find something so much richer, but it's going to require you trusting me and going all in.
Yeah.
And that's the promise, and that seems to be the history too. Like when you read, Jordan, a buddy of ours, he's taking a class in school about the history of the church, and he keeps talking to me about going, man, there were so many people that they went all in, and their stories are magnificent. Their stories are so adventurous. I mean, most of them all died, but they did all die. But they died really hard, hard deaths.
Yeah, martyr kind of.
Yeah. But you read their lives, and there's a life of meaning, a life of purpose, a life of significance, a life of joy, a life of contentment, a life of satisfaction. And you're like, wow. And they just went all in.
Yeah.
They just said, Jesus, my palms are up. I'm going to trust you.
Yeah.
So I think it's, the long and short of that, it's moral.
Yeah.
I don't think it's intellectual. I really think it's much more of a moral argument that's keeping people from going all in.
Yeah, and you gave a lot of examples. I mean, you talked about pride as one of them because I think going all in is so broad, but I mean, that can apply to somebody who's been a Christian for 10 years. It can apply to somebody who's not a Christian yet.
Yeah.
And there's so many different barriers. Even if somebody has put their faith in Christ, perhaps they're still holding on to something, whether it's financial security or pride or some relationship that's holding them back, or some moral choice, some sin in their life that's holding them back. And really, like you said, trusting Jesus with those things is the very scary question.
It's super scary.
That releases you to experience the fullness of life that he offers. Yeah.
Yep, 100%.
So you also talked about another scripture that Jesus said, one of them that's probably a little bit less emotionally satisfying for us to read and think about what he meant by it. And he said this, he said, anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. That's a pretty radical, polarizing thing for Jesus to say, especially thinking about how we feel about kids, you know, our sons, our daughters, that kind of thing. Even for me, hearing that as like, I have a son on the way who's not born yet, going, what, Jesus? Like what I already feel, that is crazy to think about. What does that look like? Which I know is a broad question. I don't even know what else to ask with it. And maybe perhaps I'll caveat with this too. Like, what is the trajectory to getting to a place where you would say something like that?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll try to answer it the best I can.
Easy question.
Yeah. With you know, some discussions and so on. Yeah, I think first, I think the understanding of the verse, I mean, it was originally written in Greek. It's the concept is love less. That and we talked about this before part one. It's the idea that it's not, I'm going to go home and I'm going to go look at my children and say, I'm not going to love you anymore. I'm not going to look at my wife and go, I'm going to be intentional to love you less so I can love Jesus more. Yeah. That's not his point. He's like, love them even more.
Yeah.
You know, continue to love them at the same degree and even a greater degree tomorrow. But what I love about Jesus, and I alluded to this at the beginning of the message, if he tells you, if he's like, I'm commanding this, I'm calling you to this, I'm inviting you to this, it's real, it's tangible, it's objective, you can move into it and experience what he's saying. Which means he's saying it is possible to love your kids like you love them today and will love them more tomorrow. To love your relationships and your wife and your husband like you do today and tomorrow. But it's also possible categorically to love something even greater, and that's me. That's possible for you. So I think that's important to understand, that it's not, you know, it's not the interpretation to go and love less, you know, your kids and everything. It's just there's a depth to the love of Christ that compels you and moves you and inspires you to something that seems to be impossible, you know, at initially hearing, but it inspires you to move to different places in your life. So I think that's first. I think the other thing too is I was having a conversation with somebody a week ago, and we were talking about this verse, and I was like, I think it's kind of like having kids. You know, it's really, really, really difficult to quantify in terms of like, you know, here's a one line and boom, that's how you do it. You know, it's really difficult to go like, you know, gosh, let me tell you what that feels like experientially.
Yeah.
And it's like having kids. Like I can talk about, you know, or you know, before you had your son, you know, you could talk, oh yeah, I'm going to love my son and I'm going to, you know, but once you have kids, it's like, I don't know if I can fully describe this, but it's real. It's possible. It's possible to love somebody that you're willing to give your life for. Like, I'm going to step in front of that bus. I will do it. You know, like there's a depth of love that you're like, Now you can talk about it in like theory. You can talk about it academically, but you got to have a kid. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I got it. I got it. And that's a little bit about a little bit of an explanation on how you can experience this. It's possible, but it's extraordinarily difficult. And I would say in terms of like steps and stages, I don't know about steps and stages. I think you could create some maybe linear path to some degree, like, hey, first put your trust in Jesus. Second, begin to surrender some moral areas of your life that he's called you to a higher standard, not something to oppress you, something to liberate you. And then begin to study who he is and begin to research and invite him into your daily life. And, we call that time with God or opening the Bible. And then begin to practice some of the spiritual disciplines of fasting and memorizing scripture and meditating before the Lord and being still. All of those things, I think, are progressive and absolutely are part of the formula, if you will. But the challenge is I don't think there's any formula. I just think it's like I've seen people, just like the woman that the story I shared on Sunday, that it's like it can be this. It can be a pivotal circumstance in life. And it's like all of a sudden in this moment, it's like Jesus met me in that moment of hardship, that moment of difficulty, whatever that moment is in life. And I'm telling you, he was so incredibly real to me. So I'll give you an example of this. I'm talking to this guy, and he's part of our church, and he is brilliant beyond brilliant. In fact, there's 5 guys in the United States of America who have his credentials to do what he does. And he does things that impact our universe. And so I'm sitting next to with this guy, and we're talking about his story. And he says, he went to all the incredible schools I could name, but to get his multiple degrees, and he was talking about most of his colleagues and most of his professors were all atheist. And I was like, okay. And I was like, well, how'd you meet Jesus? Like, everything in your world should have pushed you kind of in the environment to be an agnostic, which I feel like is an intellectually honest place, or to be an atheist, to just kind of go with the crowd and everybody's going to do that. And I said, what happened? And he said, well, one night, I can't explain what happened. I'm walking up the stairs and there was something that just felt unexplainable. It's, the laws of physics couldn't explain what was happening in that moment. And so as a result, I went and read the whole New Testament that night and put my faith in Jesus Christ. And Buck, I'm telling you, there's nothing I love greater than him. There's nothing. And I'm like, well, that happened in a span of, 8 hours. I don't know how. He's probably a pretty fast reader.
Yeah, yeah, he's a smart guy.
And so, and it's undeniable that, there's nothing he loves more. And it's like there's something that's in him that, happened in a flash. So I've seen that. And then I've seen more kind of the progressive place to go, when I was a kid, I put my faith in Jesus. And then, a few circumstances happened. Then I began to ask questions. And then, I began to spiritual disciplines. And I began to trust Jesus with these moral areas of my life. And I grew and I grew and I grew. And I came to a place to go, oh my gosh, I think right now there's no one in the universe I love more than him. I'm in awe of him.
Yeah.
And so I wish I had a much better answer to that.
It's like we're stepping into those waters of the unknown that it's like almost just God needs to meet you there.
Yeah. Yeah. God is a mysterious God, and that's not an excuse not to give a little bit more concrete answer. But it categorically goes in a place that it honestly does feel like there's, you got to experience it.
Yeah.
It's like you got to have a kid. I would say a really good resource, and we were talking about this beforehand, to talk about a more linear path. It's a book called Mansions, I think.
Mansions of the Heart.
Mansions of the Heart. I would highly recommend that book because that's probably the most succinct, logical kind of going through the 7 mansions to get to a place where the ultimate outcome is in the 7th mansion of a loving relationship with Christ. And it's to the point to go, it is to the degree that there's nothing in this world that you could describe as loving more than Jesus. That's the 7th mansion. And it's an incredible, incredible place. And I'm not saying I've arrived, and I think, you kind of ebb and flow in all of that. And that's probably the greatest resource I would give. And if you're listening or watching, I'd say, man, get the book. And it's a fantastic book, just practically speaking.
Yeah.
But it's a great book to kind of walk through a little bit more linear path to get to a place to go through all 7 of those mansions. And I kind of mentioned that, putting your faith in Christ, asking your questions, begin to serve in the spiritual disciplines, reading the Bible, all these. But eventually you get to a place to where you go through hardships. You go to these places where you doubt. You go to these places where you feel like the church isn't doing it for me any longer. You go to all these kind of mansions, if you will, and ultimately you can get to a place. It does exist to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength.
Yeah. And really quick, I just looked up that book to give the author. So it's called Mansions of the Heart by R. Thomas Ashbrook.
Yeah.
R. Thomas Ashbrook.
It's a great resource.
Yep, really is. That's great. I have one more question, but we might be orbiting around the last question a little bit, but I think I still want to bring it up. Mother Teresa kind of described this mansion place, this kind of hard to articulate place of what it means to love Jesus. You shared it on Sunday, but I'll just repeat it because it was so good. She said, "Put yourself completely under the influence of Jesus so that he may think his thoughts in your mind, do his work through your hands, for you will be all powerful with him to strengthen you." And it's so tough again because it's a paradox. We want to go, okay, so what do I do to get there? But it's not about a do. It's about something that I don't know, God does in us as we continue just to explore and discover who Jesus is and who he is to us. It's almost like as we explore and discover, we begin to just love him more and more and more and more in that journey. But yeah, I don't know what to say other than like, what do you do? But it's not about doing, and that was kind of your point on Sunday. Is there anything else just in light of that quote that you would add to this entire conversation if someone's going, man, I want to discover who Jesus is. I want to love Jesus more. But where do I go with that?
Yeah, I think there's one question I would leave the listener with, and I've said this before. It all starts with answering the question, who is Jesus? Who is he? It's the thing that led C.S. Lewis to go, is he a liar? Is he a lunatic? Or is he Lord? Because he claimed to be God. Is he Lord? Because if he's Lord, that's a game changer. If he's Lord, then there is something that I can love with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. But I think you've got to answer that question first. Who is Jesus? Get to the bottom of it. In fact, on Sundays, I've said before, I'm like, dude, I'm not a big encourager of debt, but like, this would be a dramatic statement. I don't even know if I believe it, but I might as well say it. I'd like max out your credit cards. Do everything you can to get to because you can, subscribe to Dave Ramsey and get out of debt. So there's a way forward if you got into that much debt. But if you got the outcome of discovering who Jesus really is, it's worth every ounce of it. It's worth every ounce. It will compel you, move you, inspire you, give you a foundation, meaning and purpose and significance. It will give you a new identity. It will give you wind in your sails to breathe in a way you've never breathed before. It is real. It is tangible, but I think it does start. And Mother Teresa did that, when she lost her father early and, she had her mom and sister, and she just gazed into the eyes of Jesus Christ and saw him for who he is. She answered the question, and she spent the next 59 years loving people in the most radical ways. And she learned that because she saw Jesus for who he was. And I'm just telling you, it's a game changer. Her life has changed millions of lives. And this is what Jesus called us to do. Go love, his number one command. Go love as I have loved you.
Yep.
That's it. And so it's really hard to quantify, but that's the question I would leave people with is, who is Jesus? Go do whatever you got to do to get to the bottom of that.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to wrap up. I think, and that brings it full circle to, we talked about the first half of that verse, love God, and now we're talking about the second half of that verse coming up. Okay, now that I'm empowered, what does it mean to love my neighbor? And that's going to be in part 2 of the series.
Yeah,
so
I'm excited.
Awesome. Buck, thank you so much.
You got it. See ya.